intro, so I think I gotta wait until it actually shows me like a little eyeball or aha. And here we are for the Sunday episode of Dualistic Unity Raw, or rather, here we are for another Sunday episode of Dualistic Unity Raw. I love Sundays, they're a lot of fun. And I think the reason is because we have that gap. And sometimes within that gap, I'm either more active in my life or perhaps people have been more entertaining in our social media comments and feeds. And so there's always something that we have to kind of chat about right from the start. I'd like to bring up this misconception that people seem to have that if you are a fulfilled, complete, whole individual, that you are practicing awareness and empathy and sensitivity, and you are acting with responsibility, that all of that means that you're going to be the most popular motherfucker in the room. And I think that that's just funny because most people don't want any of those things. They say they do, but the more they're running from their own shit, the more they're lying to themselves, the less they want somebody honest or aware around them. And so it's really important to recognize that the more you embody any of the qualities or traits that I was just discussing, the less popular you're likely to be in a society that's based on a mentality that's the exact opposite. It's really important to know this because when you're talking to people, they're often going to throw this argument at you like, oh, well, obviously people don't like what you're saying, so therefore it's not worth saying. It's like a lot of people have been pissed off about a lot of things that ended up being right in the end. So it's not about being popular. It's not about being liked because it really comes down to the person who likes you or dislikes you. Why do they like or dislike you? And if it's because they're trying to attach to you or because they can't attach to you or because you're questioning their false certainty, then that has nothing to do with you and everything to do with their own fragility that they choose to embody and reinforce. You don't have to be popular to be a whole, complete person. In fact, like I said, in a society that's based on a mentality where we always lack, you are less likely to be popular if you are a whole, complete person.
Yeah, I find it interesting just in regards to responsibility too. Like if you're pushing responsibility, like the deeper you go with that, the more you're pushing that, the less people are gonna feel good about it. Like it's that discomfort of recognizing that it's on you. Like you can't push it on other people. And I've was having some conversations with some people close to me about therapy and therapists and whatnot. And we're kind of getting into the difference between feeling better and getting better, and how there's going to be a lot of people out there. Like one of them had gone to a therapist who they were saying how, they get stressed out in their life. They were admitting they can be kind of a dick to people sometimes. And the therapist straight up was like, I think you're being hard on yourself. I couldn't picture you doing that. I couldn't imagine. And they were like, I'm telling you that. That's how I feel. Like, no, this is me telling you that. And so the therapist is like fucking gaslighting them. And I was laughing my ass off. And I was like, oh my God, the fact that they're just not even willing to go into it with you. And then it's immediate, just like soothing. Just like, oh no, you're being hard on yourself. It's okay. It's all right. And then they were talking about how they were getting stressed out about a party they were hosting coming up. And the therapist didn't want to dig into that. They wanted to help them plan the party. They wanted to be like their little assistant to support them. And it was like, what the fuck? Like, it's so funny how, and because that's what a lot of people want too. They want that validation. They just want to hear like, "Oh, it's you're not so bad. It's okay. Like you're doing a great job. It's you're doing the best you can." And it's not to say that there aren't times and places for that response. Absolutely, for the supportive thing, but you're paying money to this person. You don't want them just fucking rubbing your back. You can just go to a masseuse if you want that, patting you on the back, building you up and all that shit. Cause that's feeling better versus getting better. It's being uncomfortable and looking at the things that long term allow you to work through stuff. It's like the process of getting better is not an immediate thing. It's not this thing like, posting videos online. If you just immediately make people feel good, those willing to take responsibility, if you're pushing responsibility, they will, maybe it'll be a little bit uncomfortable, but they will kind of feel good in a sense from that, because they're like, oh yeah, this is on me. I can let this go or whatever. Whereas other people just push this thing where they're like, oh no, it's you just feel good right now. Just avoid that shit. Just here's a way to feel better. So that difference between feeling better and getting better, I think, is something that is not looked at enough in our society. Like the just desire to avoid, the desire to suppress, the desire to feel comfortable, and it directly allows you to avoid the things that allow you to actually get better. But the process of getting better is not going to feel amazing all the time. It's like with anything that you go through, learning a new skill, it's going to be uncomfortable at first. You're going to fail a bunch at first. You're going to not be very good at it. But if you're always just trying to be the best at everything all the time, you're never going to try anything new. That's the process with anything. And if you're down in the shit for a while, climbing out is going to take some work. It's going to take some effort. It's going to be an uncomfortable process initially, but then you work through it, you build all these skills and tools, and then there isn't so much anymore. It's not just this avoid every single time. It's on you. You're stronger. Like, don't pray for an easy life. Pray for the strength to handle a difficult one. That whole thing. And so it's a very interesting dynamic that I don't think enough people recognize the difference.
Well, and admittedly, I think a part of that is because it becomes a business model, right? With any business model, you start eventually catering to the larger crowd. And so the larger crowd in this case, as I was saying, in terms of popularity, doesn't want to be challenged. Like, we just want to be made to feel better. And so if you want to have a lot of clients as a new upcoming therapist, then you're going to be validating them constantly. That's what you're going to do. They're going to walk in the door. You're going to tell them everything they want to know to make them feel better. And very little that is going to challenge them or their current beliefs, because otherwise they could leave. They may not want to continue on. And then you're suffering for your bottom line. How are you going to pay for your office? How are you going to pay for your building? How are you going to pay for, that new house plant that you put in the waiting area, that kind of thing? Like, all of this is a consideration, whether we want to admit it or not. Right. But at the end of the day, even in school for counseling, they are told, like, you're not here to validate people. You're supposed to question them. You're supposed to challenge them. That is in the education, but it's not in the mentality of the people who are learning how to be psychologists. And this is where we forget, like, you can teach people that in principle things are a good thing to do, but if they lack the integrity to do so, they're not going to. Right? And so that's the problem. Largely, is that we're going to people who are running a business, and so they're going to cater to people as though they're running a business. And so that is unfortunately why most people who go to a psychologist or a therapist end up coming away feeling like that person doesn't really actually give a shit about them, because they don't. And which is sad, because by virtue of the very role that they've decided to play in our society, that should be first and foremost on their list of things to do, is empathize. That's it, empathize. But how do you build a schooling system around empathy? How do you build a doctorate in empathy, right? You can't. So all you can do is fall back to pounding concepts into their head, theory upon theory upon theory, and then sending them into the world going, okay, find the closest match to whatever theory you think this is and run with it. And so it's not about self-awareness. It's not about empathy. I just had somebody on Friday have a conversation with me, because, as you know, Andrew and I both do one-on-one sessions from time to time. And that was exactly what was communicated, was the fact that I was just having a conversation with them. I wasn't looking for what was wrong with them. I wasn't trying to fix them. I wasn't coming from a place of going, yes, we need to analyze this together. It was just, all right, let's just chat in a judgment-free environment where you can work through things, and maybe I can offer some perspectives, that you haven't looked at, but only from my own experience, only from things I'm willing to look at, right? And so by the end of the conversation, there isn't just this feeling that you've been offered a strategy to work on your problems, but that you've actually made a connection and reminded yourself what life is all about, reminded yourself, where the value and the beauty in existence comes from. It's just from feeling yourself. It's just feeling like yourself. That's all it is. And so therapy, unfortunately, gives therapy a bad name. This is why you and I were joking that I find it really funny that therapist is spelled exactly like the rapist, except there's a space.
I told someone that this weekend and they laughed pretty hard. Someone who had been through therapy a number of times, and because when you see it, like, oh man, even that the whole industry, like when you start looking at that, and I had a number of conversations just about all industries in general, like not just therapy and big pharma, but like everything from money, military to government to housing. Like you take not even a super deep look, just a peek into what's really going on. They're all super fucked up and they keep us, we're kept distracted enough to not really take a peek, or at least focused on other things to not take a peek, or comfortable enough to not take a peek. And so we don't even realize that. But with therapy, like even just having an industry built around that, it's yeah, that's a great point right there. But even just having an industry built around that, like you start to see, especially because someone I was talking with, they were getting they were pushing this like ADHD diagnosis, and the therapist was kind of pushing this, and then everything, once they kind of just got caught on that, the therapist got caught on that, not even the person going to the therapy, it was the therapist. They Everything that the person said was tied back, and they're like, oh well, that's something that has to do with your ADHD, that's what it is, that's it. And they just kept going through that, and the person was sitting there just like, well, you're not even listening to me anymore. You're just saying that I have ADHD. And then, so they're like fucking drug pushers. Like, they're like pawns for the pharmaceutical industry. And I'm totally generalizing here. I'm not saying there are therapists out there who do come at it from a much different approach, and they're not, as just, I don't know, like follow the book, diagnose, give this, like they actually genuinely go into it because with that degree of empathy. But there's a lot that don't. And it makes sense, even because that's like the simpler way, in a sense. You don't have to, simpler way for the person in it, like they can just follow the rules as opposed to think and have empathy and have a genuine connection with the person. They just follow the book, go by the book. And it's fascinating to me that that's even like a big thing that's considered. So it's not even a conversation. And Ray and I have plenty of conversations, and sometimes it's more of like a one-on, if I'm usually it's me going through some shit and just need a chat. It's always just a chat. It's never, but I always come out of it feeling, better than I did going in. And it's never like, oh, well, it's obviously it's never like, oh, well, let's try this treatment or this treatment or that treatment. And it's like, it's absurd that that's immediately where people would go, like so quickly, is let's figure you out. Let's figure out what's wrong and give you this thing. And and then once we figure out what's wrong, there's a pill that matches whatever thing is wrong. And so sometimes it makes me wonder, obviously the symptoms of something like any diagnosis are a thing that can be seen, but the things that we diagnose people with, the disorders and whatnot, like they they're abstract. Like they're not things tied to reality. They're kind of like, we think that they're things that we own and we have, and I don't even know how to put this. Like they think they're things that are placed on top of us, like there's something that exists and then we kind of get it, like we get a sickness in a sense, like we get a virus, but it's a way to label certain things that we feel, like it comes from us, and things that we feel, things that we go through, things that we experience, then that gets boxed up and it's called that. It's not like something you catch. You don't catch a disorder. You don't catch ADHD, for example. It's just a phrase for an experience, for things that you're going through in order to try and find a certainty. And then once you do, then there's a trajectory with that. You know, you get some Adderall that calms you, basically, for people who actually have, like, are diagnosed with it, as opposed to someone like me who's taken it in the past and it just like gets me wired as fuck and like super focused. Someone with it more so like chills them out, from my understanding. And it's basically just, I don't know, seems like a numbing mechanism to bring them closer to that, you know, normalcy on the bell curve of the normalcy of society, get them back in line so they can study and do their shit, as opposed to being someone who learns in a less of a linear way, in a non-linear way, which we talked about. We have a community topics on ADHD, I think specifically ADHD. It's in there. There's a YouTube playlist, but yeah, so it's interesting how they're all ways to label certain things that we go through, as opposed to something that, I don't know, like I said, something that we catch.
Well, because there's a difference in our mentality, and I know this because I went into psychology for a little bit and quickly dropped out, and it's because I was told that there's a difference in perception. Specifically, I was told to go towards philosophy for this specific reason. In psychology, there tends to be this underlying idea that we are the sum of our parts, that everything is additive. So you are your person, and then you get traits and habits on top of that. You get personality, I guess, quirks on top of your normalcy, as it were, is where you and I, in our conversation here, tend to look at it as you are whole and complete. All of the possible things you could feel are already within you. Nothing is being added. It's just your focus that's changing. And so that perspective changes how you can deal with a quote unquote disorder. See, if you think a disorder is something that's being added to your life, now it's something you have to get rid of. And there's a problem. There's an entirely different path in terms of how you're looking at this. Whereas if you think you're whole and complete and everything's just within you, it's just that you've gotten stuck on something, which is what a disorder is. It's a category of repetitive behavior. Well, then now you have the option of retraining yourself, of stepping out of that mentality, of, learning how to dissipate that connection to that mentality and change your life accordingly. And so therapy can actually work in that case. Whereas the rest of the time, you're more or less just helping them to develop some kind of a coping mechanism. Right. So that's really important. But I wanted to go back very quickly because we were talking about how, there are therapists who aren't practicing awareness and more or less just, exercising their own egotistical bias, whether they realize it or not. And then you have other therapists who aren't trying to do that and are honestly just trying to have that safe space with their client, that are offering them that room to be themselves. They're doing exactly what we're talking about. Now, here's the problem, though. Those therapists are actually kind of encouraged to not do that. And what I mean is that the best practices that they have to abide by, because they have to go for mentorship. Like, a lot of therapists have to continue to see and mentor over time, as well as to go back for additional training and schooling for every couple of years. And in that, they're taught best practices. They have to consult with other people within their field. And in doing that, there are certain things that they must do and are compelled to do just by the requirements for their licensing. And so a good example of this would be borderline personality disorder. So many people who are sent to a therapist come away with a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. Now, if you listen to the words, it doesn't fucking mean anything. But if the therapist weren't to diagnose something, there would be no coverage for any kind of treatment for that person. And so in order to help this person get some kind of help for what they're going through, the therapist, regardless if they want to or not, have to give them a label that person may hold on to and make their problem worse. There's no option because of the system that therapist is working within. Right. And so this is what I mean, is the mentality of our collective is working against any actual connection that we might be able to do within the system itself. And so it comes down to people. It comes down to each and every one of us to take those moments to connect, to be the safe space for one another. To act in a way that is non-judgmental, that has empathy, because we're not in our own way. We're not trying to do anything. We are free and fulfilled in ourselves. And this is why it's so important, because what the system's trying to do is apply a band-aid. It's like, oh, look at all these people. Their mentality is breaking down under the pressure and stress of all of this division. Quick, let's send in the equivalent of fucking firemen. And that's what they're doing. They're sending people to school to learn how to put out mental fires. And that's not how that works. Because they keep catching again, because we're not addressing the problem that everything's drying the fuck out under our divisive mindset.
It's brutal how they have to label something. Like, even if, because I guess it comes down to the therapist to understand that, right? That the label isn't actually inherent to them, because then you can find a degree of, I'm not saying like it's great that they have to label, but at least a little bit better to say like, hey, I have to say you have this. This isn't inherent to what you are. This isn't something that you have to hold on to. It's just necessary in order to get further treatment. It's just a word that has to be used. It's not something that you are. It's just a label for an experience that you're going through, and something closer to that at least doesn't cause the person to hold on to it like for the rest of their life and put it in their fucking like Instagram bio and say like BPD person or whatever, or in anything, thinking that that's like a massive component of what they are. Because with things like that, like all of those labels, BPD, ADHD, any of those things, that's like one of the top things people identify with. It's above, their nationality or their religion or anything. It's like the closest to home. This is what explains all of my behavior and allows me to kind of lack responsibility for the behavior that I go through, or at least look at it in a way that can allow you to work with it, as opposed to it's either something that is it's like something that gives you an excuse for your behavior, or something that is something you're trying to overcome constantly, as opposed to just recognizing that it's a component of you, but it's not something wrong with you. It's just a description for something that differentiates you from other people, stemming from likely from a traumatic experience with certain ones, or just the way you were born. And of course, in a system like this that kind of tries to box people and put people on a certain path and go through a specific, societal blueprint and everything like that, of course they're going to label people who don't fit that with a disorder. But it doesn't mean there's something wrong. Like the system's broken, not you. But not enough people understand that. Not enough therapists understand that that's not inherent to what they are. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with them. But as soon as we're diagnosed with something, we like it creates a cessation of a certain discomfort, because it gives you that certainty, but then it's like a weight that you're carrying with you for the rest of your life. Like it hinders that experience of letting go of what you think you are. Like if something's going to solidify you as feeling like you're inherently separate from reality, it's something like that, a label from a therapist about a disorder that they believe you to have. So it's it's just fascinates me how quick we are to want to label ourselves, but at the same time makes a lot of sense, because there's that desire for certainty. It's insidious, and it infiltrates almost basically every component of our reality and our experience.
But we always hear the argument, which is usually like, well, yeah, okay, so, but people know that, like, people know that the label ADHD isn't like, you know, something they've caught. It's like, do they know that? Is that honestly something that we can say that most people are going to pick up on, or are we just not willing to look at the reality of the mentality that we've been basically reinforcing for over, I don't know, well, several hundred years, which is that the description is in fact the described, the word God is the reality of God, all of that stuff. Like, are we really that so far removed from the mentality of your average person who's just trying to pay their bills and get through life that we don't recognize when you go over and you say to them you have a disorder? They actually think they've caught or got a disorder from somewhere, that they are in fact now changed in terms of their potential. We don't think that that's going to dawn on them, but we have this argument like, no, well, people know better. It's like, how about we stop assuming for the sake of keeping our eyes closed and actually just take the worst possible thing that could happen with any of this stuff? Doesn't matter if it's psychology, disorders, religion, concept of God, any belief whatsoever. Let's just break it down to your most afraid, confused person and ask, what would they do with it? They're going to cling to it. They're going to define themselves with it. They're going to use it as a point of conflict and something to defend. They're going to use it against everybody who disagrees with them. They're going to do all of these things. And we know that. It's just that we don't want to accept that there's a lot of people out there who are currently confused enough to do that. We want, no, they would never do that, because otherwise I have to admit that I would do that.
Exactly. Yeah. It's, oh man. Of course, like, there's so many fragile people out there, so many people just looking for that cessation of pain, suffering, uncertainty, that they'll glom onto anything, like the littlest bit of anything, even a maybe. Oh, it might be this, it might be that. And to go even beyond that, like, people self-diagnose also. Like, so often that they don't even need a therapist, and they're willing to go and just start saying that they have something because they feel like their symptoms align with the symptoms that are expressed in that, and just that desire for the certainty. But you take that far enough, and I'm just thinking now about people I know who really, really attach to the disorder, and like everything that comes up for them. Oh, it's got to be something. I got to have this, I got to have that. And just that desire for certainty. But every single time you settle upon that, you're chipping away at you, at you're disempowering yourself to a degree, like, to some degree. Every single time you say that, oh, I have this, or I'm going through this, it must be this. I'm going through this, it must be that. Every single time, it's one of the most disempowering practices we've ever gotten into. Like, because we think, and we're even born with it, you know. I've said it before, but religion does a great job reinforcing that with original sin. Like, there's inherently something wrong with you. You're inherently a sinner. You're inherently, you got something. And so then people just run with that. And then it's like, there's people who have 27 disorders because it's just every single action. Oh, it must be this, it must be that, it must be this. And then they have to defend it. And anyone who comes around who's like, well, maybe not. Like, what if, yes, you have all of these behaviors that you go through, but inherently you're perfect? Like, what if all of those behaviors weren't wrong? What if you took that approach? What if you recognize that all those things that you're labeling as a disorder, the feelings of discomfort, the way that you can't pay attention to a certain thing, what if you didn't immediately think, oh, there must be something wrong? Because the only reason we think, if a kid's in school and they can't pay attention super well, we think that paying attention is the best possible thing, as opposed to looking at the mechanism of the totality of the situation. You're like, well, let's take a step back here. Like, why do 6-year-olds have to sit in a lecture and watch a PowerPoint and learn about some shit that they couldn't give two shits about? they're all looking outside like, it looks really nice out right now. I want to go run around. I want to go play. And so just over time, it's like some align with that ability a little bit more. And that stems from parents' upbringing, what they deem to make them better, and some attach very young to that, thinking that, getting a good grade on the test makes them better. And with those who start feeling good from that, their focus shifts away from the window and outside, and they're like, I want to keep doing this because this makes me continue to feel better. And I'm getting all these A's and good grades and pats on the back, and everyone's telling me how smart I am and all of that. Whereas kids who maybe don't initially do that, they start feeling worse and worse and worse. And then they start thinking there's something wrong with them. They start paying less attention because it's not something that they're getting that, feedback from. But what if you were able to just take a step back and realize that there's actually nothing wrong with anyone? Like inherently, there's certain behaviors that come from the underlying belief that there's something wrong. And that's even a component of this conversation, is when I say there's nothing wrong with anyone, like everyone's inherently perfect as they are, because we're so steeped in the mentality that there is something wrong with us from a very young age. The product of that mentality is people doing a bunch of really fucked up shit all the time. But people want to think that, oh, you don't have an answer right now. You don't have something that's going to snap your finger and immediately make everything better. It's like, no, because the mentality shift doesn't immediately change everything, because a lot of the things are products of this existing mentality that we've had for a very long time. So as the mentality shifts, the ones who are being brought up shift with it. And then as they grow up, there aren't so many products of the mentality of thinking there's something wrong with you. Because a lot of the ways we see people acting now, a lot of the fucked up atrocities that we see happening now are a product of the belief that there is something inherently wrong with you. And so as that shifts, it is progressive, and it takes time. It doesn't happen immediately, but it does happen. And that's, as it does, we'll see how it shifts everything. But we haven't taken that approach in a very long time. And as we do, it'll I don't know, it'll be interesting to see how the products of that start to change.
Indeed. I wanted to take a quick moment because this just happened right now, and so I thought I'd make the announcement and say thank you. We just had somebody sign up for our Patreon, but they signed up as a Tier 3 supporter, and so I just wanted to say thank you very much on behalf of Andrew and myself and the community as a whole. As you know, and everybody else probably knows, Andrew and I work very hard not to make this an act of marketing. While we do have some workshops that are available, we try and keep our prices as low as possible. We're just more or less doing the best we can until we can get some advertising coming through on the podcast itself. And so this is all incredibly helpful and supportive for us, and we want to say thanks. Likewise, you're going to get some merch every 3 months. You're going to get an item of clothing with some DU related stuff on it, and you will get a free one-on-one with Andrew or myself in the immediate future. And so yeah, woohoo, thanks. It helps a great deal, especially as Andrew and I continue to push towards the ripples that are still forming. For example, we have a Vancouver retreat coming up on the 27th of July. Now, I just wanted to mention very quickly that there are still 2 tickets available for that event right now. They haven't been picked up yet by the 2 people who expressed an interest, and I haven't heard back from them as yet either. And so they are 2 queen beds. If you would like to join us in Vancouver for 4 days for a mini retreat, we'd love to see you. This is going to be awesome. We're about a 20-minute walk from the beach. We're about a half-hour walk from some nature trails. It's going to be just an epic weekend. And of course, I'm from BC, so I'm familiar with the area and the weather and everything else, and we're gonna have a bunch of weed and other stuff, and so we would love to see you. You can get the details for that on the website or on patreon.com. There are discounts. Tier 3 actually gets a $350 discount on all retreat tickets, and so that's one of the huge perks there. Want to go back to what we were saying. It's funny because we do tend to gravitate towards irresponsibility, which is it's not a new thing by any means. We've always gravitated towards irresponsibility. It's just that now the idea of a disorder is this new, shinier kind of irresponsibility because it sounds scientific. It sounds like it's based on people in a lab crunching numbers and doing all that. But what's funny is that we're talking about the subjective experience of human beings. There is nothing that you can really do about that is quantitative. It's all qualitative. It's all based on perception and interpretation. So the idea that it's absolutely science is kind of bullshit at the end of the day, because this is why you have so many different theories about human behavior. It's because it's all just theory, right? It's all just theory. It's not, in fact, a hard science. It's not something that people are looking at and going, oh, we just got to run it through this calculation. It's going to definitely turn out this way. There's no way to do that. And we forget that. So that's why people tend to gravitate towards a lot of these disorders, a lot of these diagnoses. But before that, or even now, we've always had other shit to pass the buck to. Astrology, right? Oh, I'm feeling down because the moon's not in Uranus this week, and it's like, okay. The weather, feeling depressed because it's fall, and I suffer through seasonal affective disorder. Veganism, feeling super aggressive because I ate meat this week. Like, it's always something. It's always fucking something. It's like, you got to say in all that, like, you still have influence over your general response to everything, but that's the alternative that we don't want to look at. Right? No, these things are overpowering me. These things are stronger than me, despite the fact that it's me.
Fuck, I didn't even think about just taking it from the perspective of irresponsibility and the obsession with irresponsibility, like the disease of irresponsibility, essentially. The whole weather component, like that we actually have a diagnosis for that, despite it kind of just being people not being outside as much and kind of like not being able to distract themselves as much in a sense. Like, that's a very interesting part that I haven't really thought about either, is like when someone it lives in a colder area and they're inside a lot and they can't go outside, they can't do as much, they can't see as many people. It's like, I'm not saying this is always the case. Like, I love when it's warmer and I'm outside and doing stuff with people, but there's a component of that is distractionary. Like, you're able to avoid sitting alone with yourself. And so anytime we're sitting alone with ourselves, we get a little bit uncomfortable. We can have the potential to get a little bit uncomfortable because there isn't so many distractions, and we label it as a disorder. Like, oh, I'm going through this. Like, what is the one for the weather for when it's cold? Is that like
SADS, seasonal affective disorder, or something like that?
Yeah, it's just called sad. That's fucking funny. Oh, it's just no, I'm not. It's not that I am sad. I have sad.
Because the weather's happening to me.
Oh my god. Oh, I don't mean to laugh in the face of people
I do.
Yeah.
I straight up, I do, and I have. And the only reason that I do and have in sessions with clients is because it's the only way to get over that shit. It really is. Like, if you're not willing to laugh at this shit that you overinvest in, you're never going to let it go. You have to be able to look at it and go, fuck, that's kind of funny, actually, that I got that carried away in it. And that's it. That's the all of everything. To everything you ever have to let go of is, that's kind of funny how I got carried away like that. And then move on. And that's all. But if you can't laugh at the things you've gone through and got attached to, you can't move on beyond them. That's the whole point. Like, how many people get stuck on veganism, for example? Because for them to let it go would be huge and embarrassing, right? There's all of this investment in being a vegan. And all of a sudden, if they're just like, yeah, I decided not to do that anymore. Oh my God. Why is that uncomfortable, other than the fact that, you've really invested in this idea of yourself? It's the only reason. I mean, that's why I always find it funny, because we've had a few people who follow our channel who've gotten in touch with us, and one guy who was a vegan for like 10 years or something like that, and all of a sudden he's writing to us. He's like, "Oh my God, I finally just let go of the judgment, and I allowed myself to eat a little bit of meat." And of course, it was sourced ethically and blah 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 and all of that. But he just stopped thinking to himself like, "This makes me a bad person." And so he was able to live his life a little bit, but with more awareness, with more responsibility. And that in itself, not being confined to one prison, allowed him to feel more himself and be happier as a result, and still make aware, responsible decisions. But that doesn't mean you have to identify with a particular identity or ideology or belief or any of those things. You just don't have to. But then what could you be, Andrew? You could be anything.
And even when you identify with something or you have a strong stance on something, like there's a massive hesitation or avoidance of shifting that, of changing your mind about something. Because I'm someone, I can get pretty into things and get pretty passionate about stuff, and that can be taken as thinking I'm right, and so I've toned that back. Like 5 years ago, there were certain things where I was like, "This is the way. This is the answer. This is it." And, like, I was willing to talk about it because I was enthusiastic about it. Now I'm way more hesitant to do that, so I don't get myself in that sort of pickle as much anymore when, you know, someone calls you out and they're like, "Wait, you said this was definitely it." Like, take, uh, I don't know, anything like intermittent fasting, for example. That was something that I got into, and I kind of bought hook, line, and sinker with, because there's doctors out there who have books on it, and they're willing to. It's not to say there aren't benefits to degrees, and I still incorporate it into my life for sure, but it's overblown. And anyone who's trying to make money off of a certain thing, certain ideology, certain belief, certain practice, certain way of life, there's going to be a desire to blow it out of proportion, like make certain claims about it that maybe aren't incorrect, but also aren't as extreme as people want to think they are. And we see it even with uh like with the big, like Kellogg's, for example, the big cereal companies. They have a shitload of money. They were able to invest in certain studies done by doctors that they hired that showed that the products that they were selling were, heart healthy, and the fucking food pyramids got like cereal is something you should have the most of, and carbs and shit. It's so fucked up. But of course, there's going to be that. And so, anyway, that's kind of a little side thing. But what I was getting at is people think it's a weakness to admit when you're wrong about something, because it's very uncomfortable. When you have to say like, yeah, I know, I was super passionate about that thing, and yeah, I did kind of say that was the answer, and yeah, it wasn't. But like, I've been through that a number of times in my life where I've had to take a couple steps back and be like, yeah, that wasn't quite it in the way that I thought. And when someone calls me on it or something, and I'll have to say it, but then almost every time the person's like appreciative that you're willing to admit that it wasn't quite the way that you thought. So I go into things now with a lot more hesitancy, but it's with anything we identify as. There is a strong desire and just push to continue to do so, even when you're not feeling the passion behind it anymore. And so a lot of people take, with your example that you just said about with vegan and veganism, that people hold very, very tightly to that, and then maybe they'll start to not feel as great as they did initially, and they'll start shifting away from the whole food veganism and start going towards the fucking fast food veganism, because they're out there. And it's so funny that people just think, oh, it's made of plants, therefore it's better. And it's like, actually, made of more, it has more ingredients and more shit in it than just eating a fucking burger, like a vegan burger versus a regular burger. It's like that shit's full of all this crazy ass shit. And so they maybe, this is just hypothetical, someone goes from like eating whole food type stuff and like feeling good to then they're like still vegan, and now they're in a community and now they're a component of that. So they can't give up the veganism, but they're kind of getting tired of eating all the whole foods. So they move over to that. And then they're not feeling as great. And now it's a decision. Do I want to keep holding on to this thing because it's uncomfortable to let it go, uncomfortable to let go of this community that I built? People will likely get pissed at me or think that I'm a fraud or whatever, which is their prerogative, because the alternative is them recognizing that they're holding on to something super tightly. So it's stemming from their own desire to not let go of their discomfort. So do I want to let go of that and go through that discomfort? Or do I want to go continue going through the constant discomfort of maintaining this way of life? And it's like, well, that's not for me to decide, that's for you to decide. But a lot of people will just continue holding on to it because it's uncomfortable to let it go, because they're afraid of letting it go. And that oftentimes becomes the only reason, until it's like enough of a weight that they're like, all right, finally I will. But most people hold on for a very long time before they let that go, because of the pushback and the people in their life and the community that they've been in. They'll get pushback from them, oftentimes ostracized from that. Meanwhile, a lot of the people in it are probably having some of those feelings. So they have to ostracize you, or else they have to look at themselves and look at their own behavior and look at their own practices and look at their own things that they're going through. And so it's just very interesting to see that, and how unwilling we are to let go of the things that we attach to, that we think mean something about us, because people are attaching and everyone's attaching. And the alternative is recognizing that, oh, maybe I can't define myself. Maybe I can't settle upon an idea of myself. Meanwhile, that being the experience of freedom, not settling upon a label or a tightly held belief sort of thing, not realizing like that's the experience of freedom, is letting go of that. But it can be uncomfortable initially. There will be people who don't want to be free, who you get pushback from. So it's it's interesting. And there's so much just freedom in letting that shit go. And it's uncomfortable to admit when you're holding on to some shit, but it's yeah. Derek, make some bacon right now, contemplating veganism. Amen, dude. Love me some bacon.
It's really interesting because we go through this repetitive cycle of talking about letting go and what it is that we're attaching to, and more importantly, I think why we're attaching to it. And I think that while that works to a certain depth, I think that eventually one has to go beyond the why in terms of there being a specific reason individually, because I think it's easy to forget that the only way to attach is to assign meaning to yourself. I mean, that's what attachment is at the end of the day, you're like, this has something to do with me and my value. And so it doesn't matter the reasons that we're doing it. It matters that we're doing it. And why are we doing it? We're doing it because, well, just think about it visually. Like, when do we want to grab onto something? When we feel like we're drowning, when we feel like we're going to be carried away. So it's a reflex out of fear. And we all feel this fear. It's interesting. I was talking to somebody last week about a lot of the things that they're afraid of, and there was a good list. And I asked if they had ever considered that, in fact, the problem wasn't all of these different fears, but fear itself, the experience of being afraid that gets translated into other experiences. But it's the experience of being afraid that is ultimately what you're wrestling with, not the fear of the thing, the fear itself. And so one would go, well, why am I afraid? Well, I can give you an endless list, because you don't know what's coming. I think that's the biggest one. You don't know what's coming, ever. And with that goes immediate fear. that you can run from, and often we do, without recognizing that we do. Or you can try and find the specific cause of that fear, hoping that if you can find the cause and get rid of it, the fear itself will go away. Or you can accept that the possibility of being afraid is always going to be there. It's always going to be there, and it grows depending on how you perceive yourself in the face of that fear. If you perceive yourself to be less than the fear that you're perceiving, it becomes bigger because of your perception. But it's recognizing that the fear is just there. It's not that you've done something wrong. It's not there because you're not enough. It's there because you're everything. You are the entire spectrum of emotion, the entire spectrum of perception that you could have about any given one fucking moment. The fear is always going to be there, but it's not a fear of one thing. It's the experience of fear. That's what you're wrestling with, is the experience of fear. And so in terms of letting go, that's what we're dealing with. You see, it's funny. We're like, how do I let go of this? How do I let go of that? No, it's just let go, which means accept that you're afraid and don't immediately react in kind. That's really it. Over and over and over again, in every variation based on every experience, but that's the core of it all the time.
Oh, you said two things there that I wrote down that I really liked. We want to grab onto something when we feel like we're drowning. Anytime we feel like we're drowning, we always want to grab onto something. Like, yeah, every time. Like, it's always, of course, because there has to be something, as opposed to, I mean, the alternative is recognizing that you can swim and you know how to swim, but you have to you have to stop looking for something to grab onto in order to realize that you can swim. Like, you have to take your focus and eyes off of the potential things that you could grab and realize that none of them actually help. They're just a band-aid. They're just a short-term solution is all it is. And then going back to what you finished off with was, we're afraid because we don't know what's coming. And that's literally always the case. Like, we always, every single moment, don't know what's coming. And that's where the fear stems from, because we don't know. Because we don't know where it's going, or what's to come, or what's going to come after it, or what's going to come after that, or what's going to come after the thing, after the thing, after the thing, after the thing. We can't know that. And that's fear itself. And we just, oh my God. And then there's a certain thing that might be coming, and rather than recognizing that we don't know what's coming, and that's the root of the fear, we think it must be that thing. It must be that thing, because that provides us with that false sense of certainty. That gives us the
And it's in my focus. Right? That's the thing. This is the thing that's in my focus. That's got to be the problem. Right? And then once that's solved, oh, look, there's another problem. Fuck. It's almost like the problem is following me around. Crazy.
Exactly. Because it's always, you don't know what's coming. That is the constant in your life. The constant is, I don't know what's coming. Ever. Ever, 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 ever. And if you think that there's a way to know, you're going to think that there's an alternative to not knowing. And that's where we come up with certain situations. We try to find the control, the certainty, all of those things. And we do everything, like so many things in our life. We build a gate around our house, a gate around the gate around our house. We don't take any risks, because it's like, this will mitigate my not knowing what's coming. This will allow me to know what's coming. I do this to fucking take marriage till death do us part. I know what's coming now. Holy fuck, if that's not just a way of mitigating, I don't know what's coming and I never can. It's like, I'm afraid of that. Well, this is something big in my life. Well, how do I do that? Well, stay together forever, and if you don't, you're gonna burn for eternity. All right, that works. All right, that checks out. That gets rid of my concern for that. And then that's not how it plays out at all whatsoever. Like, oh my God. It's the constant. I don't know what's to come. And we
So
do everything.
promise me something. That's what it is. I mean, that's why we don't question our governments. We don't question our banks. We don't question our insurance corporations. We don't question the World Health Organization. We don't question the UN. We don't question anything. Why? Because the alternative is that they're full of shit and we're still on our own and uncertain. So instead, we repeatedly invest in retirement funds that are going to eventually get fucking undercut or sold from underneath us or devalued in the long term, or they're going to end up changing the requirements. So that way we can't actually get the full retirement fund or the full pension, right? They're going to continue to undermine the banking system and create inflation, regardless of how much we believe in the system. We're all going to continue to get fucked by it because we just don't want to deal with the fact that we have to be responsible. We have to. And anybody who comes along and offers you some false promise of the future is going to be this, it's going to be tempting to follow that motherfucker until you're responsible. And then immediately you're going to go, that seems like a little bit too good to be true. Can we talk about that? But this is politics. This is exactly what you're seeing in politics. They will promise you the moon and deliver nothing. I mean, look at what just happened with Biden's promise of debt forgiveness in the States. Oh, we're going to forgive all the student loans. All of a sudden the system's like, no, fuck, you're not. It's like, oh, that's shocking. The system took the side of money.
Oh God, it's great. It really is like with politics. Every time I just think about student council voting at school, like in high school or middle school, and the ridiculousness. And that's just that played out in adulthood with seemingly more complex issues. And instead of being like, I'm gonna have all your favorite candy bars in the vending machine instead of this shitty healthy stuff. And everyone's like, yeah, that doesn't happen. But no one even thinks about that. They just vote off of the feeling that they get, the potential for, oh, this makes me feel better that this, because, oh, fuck, because that's just the cessation of the uncertainty. It's that feeling. I don't know what's to come. I'm afraid of that. And then they promise something in the future and it doesn't actually come to fruition, but that doesn't matter. People don't even remember most of the time what the promises even were. Some people do. They track that and then they're like, yeah, fuck, that shit never actually plays in. And those are
We're going to
usually
close Guantanamo.
like, ah, it's, oh God, it's fucking anything. And, oh God. And then people will get behind it. And it's like, how many times do we have to go through this shit to realize that they're full of shit? Like they don't actually have your best interest at heart. How many times do we have to go through a situation like COVID, for example? That was the first time I had been through really a mass situation where it's like all this shit just so overwhelming, so much fucking fear just getting pounded into us that then we have to figure that out. And yeah, exactly. There's politicians in the US who don't fulfill their campaign promises, don't get reelected. Yeah, it's just wild to see it play out over and over and over and over and over. But we think like we even have the mentality that we think that this is the best we've ever done. And so it's the best we can do. And I was having this conversation with someone about that. And that's kind of where it ended off. It ended up, it got a little rocky throughout the conversation, but because we got into just underlying mentality shift versus what's the answer? Oh, well, this person's done this person's done that, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, yeah, but it's still coming from that, divisive mentality. And that's the shift. And they're like, well, then what's your answer? I don't have an answer. We'll find out as we start to recognize that we're standing on top of a bullshit assumption that we're separate from reality, that we're not the world, that we're something separate. And so it ended off with finishing with the conversation just around this situation that we have in society. well, we've tried the others and this is the best. And I'm like, yeah, but you recognize, right, that just because something may seem to you right now like it's the best that we've ever done, despite it that not being true at all. We don't know anything beyond 10,000 years ago and how all of those things played out. It doesn't mean it's the best we can do. And there's not things we can look at and ways to shift things, but it's very uncomfortable to realize that the whole fucking shebang may need a shakedown. That's very uncomfortable. So we just want to keep kicking the can down the road. We'd shove garbage just under the ground. We're like, yeah, that'll play out. It's like, span that out 100 years even. You don't think that shit's gonna come around to bite you in the fucking ass? But doesn't matter because you think you're gonna be dead because you think you're just what you think you are, and therefore you're gonna be gone in, you know, 30 to 80 years.
It is so interesting. It just dawned on me why we have such a fucked up view of this system, and why when you have a conversation with somebody, they're like, yeah, well, how do you fix it then? What are you going to fix? And it's just because it's the difference between viewing our system, our way of life as an organic being, as a building or a tree. And we look at it like it's a building made of bricks. We look at society, the way that humans live, as a building. And so they're like, what? The building's broken. What do we have to repair? What do we fix? And it's like, but it's not a building. It's organic and growing all the time, which means that it is nothing like a building. In fact, it is changing all the time. And so what we're saying is the tree is rotten. The tree is rotten to its core, and it's suffering as a result. And they're all like, yeah, well, how do we make it a brand new tree then? It's like, start with a seed, grow from there. But we don't want to look at it that way because that sounds like a lot of fucking work, doesn't it? And we forget that that's how we got here. That's how we got here. This is why the founding fathers said there has not been a democracy yet that has not committed suicide. And it's because of the lack of responsibility and awareness of the citizens themselves. They rely on the government, they pass off responsibility. A couple hundred years later, all of a sudden the system is in control and nobody's using their fucking brain. And democracy dies that way. We have to be in the driver's seat of our own life all the time, which is why the focus was liberty. Over and over and over and over again, the founding fathers pounded on one fucking concept: liberty, not democracy, liberty, freedom of mind, the freedom to live your life as you see fit. Why did they pound on that? Because that's the fucking seed that stops the corruption. That's what keeps the tree fresh and alive, is all of us being lively, not all of us just toning ourselves down to a common narrative where the tree itself is just starting to wither and stagnate. And that's what it is, but we forget that. And it's because we look at this as a building, because we're surrounded by buildings. We are surrounded by evidence of how awesome humanity is at being in control, despite the fact that if any of these buildings weren't maintained, they would fall down. If any of these roads weren't maintained, they'd fall apart. If any of these bridges weren't maintained, they'd fucking collapse. But trees will just go on living until they've lived their life, and then they'll spawn other fucking trees after the fact. But we don't look at life that way because we are surrounded with our own false evidence of superiority.
Oh man, yeah, because part of me for a while and my view on this has shifted a bit. And I don't know how things are gonna fucking play out by any means, but I've kind of thought it's gonna take a massive atrocity, something big to shake us enough, or just fucking clean and slate and just the earth starting over, essentially, for this mentality to be busted up. But I really like the tree and the seed example, is that, if you recognize that the tree is rotten, you can't repair it. It has to start from scratch, from the seedling point of view. But at the same time, it's kind of both. It's like the tree's already rotten. That shit's gonna fall over at some point, and it's just how well the seed has grown in the meantime, I guess. Like how new and young the seed is before the tree collapses, because the seed's already dropped. The seed's already fallen off the tree. And even that, like, it's like there have been a bunch of seeds that have fallen off the tree, and it's just the environment that allows that seed to take root. Because there's lots of seeds that fall off of trees that don't root. They don't express into a tree. It needs an environment. It needs attention. It needs the right sort of mentality to grow it. And any mentality can stem from any of those new seeds. A lot of them can be existing mentalities. So it's almost like there's all of these seeds that are continuing to grow as well. And the overarching mentality is this rotten tree. The inside's been eaten out, basically. It's gonna timber at some point. And so it's just which seeds have enough attention, enough of the right environment, enough behind it to continue to grow. And so maybe it's both. Maybe it's, the other one is the seed grows enough that it's like our whole society is a brand new, fully grown tree before the other one timbers. Like, who knows exactly how it plays out? But yeah, I like that shift in the focus a little bit, away from thinking it's a structure. Like, especially living in New York, it's like there's so many old buildings and it's just constant repairs all the time. Like, they just go through every time, like every year they go through, and there's a leaky this, a crumbling this, a leaky that, and it's just repair after repair after repair. And that's what our mentality thinks is going to do it. But we're existing in a very old, crumbling building that we just keep patching up, or like a boat with a bunch of holes, and we keep duct taping it despite it sinking pretty quickly.
And we're always behind in terms of the best way to fix it, because we're always relying on laws and rules and decisions that were made 20 fucking years ago by people who were septuagenarians. Right. And that's the thing, is like our system is so slow to move with what's happening. Why do you think the system has so much trouble with the internet? Like, it is crazy how many people who are making decisions about the fucking internet don't know how to use their browser or anything. They use words they've never fucking heard about. Half the time they're being informed by their interns, and they're making laws that everybody has to abide by. It's fucking nuts. If you were to hire a carpenter who was only trained by people 50 years ago, has never updated his skill set since then, and you're asking him to install something that's new, that's going to create problems. It's going to create a lot of confusion, and you might end up being, just ending up with the best that he could do. That is not a template for a system, not one that influences all of our lives. So we have to wrap up here in about 5 minutes, but I wanted to mention quickly, because it seems like fucking ages ago, we actually had this conversation once upon a time in depth about how the system might go ass over, as it were. Season 2, episode 6, it's called The Big One. And I want to mention season 2 specifically because after season 1, and if anybody here hasn't listened to season 1, go and listen to season 1. It's really important, because there's a lot in season 1. But after season 1, season 2 was very much a discussion of, oh, well, what the fuck does that mean about all of this then? So season 2 is a lot of really good discussion. I really enjoyed season 2, and I know that it's something that a lot of people skip over because there's that fear of missing out. I've listened to first episode, time to jump to season 5, and you're missing so much in between. So I encourage you, if you're not going to go and check out season 3, which you should, if you're at all interested in how the community has grown, season 4, and how we've, ended up with more exposure around the world, things like that. Like, it's just all one big progression. All of the seasons are kind of the unfolding story of how this discussion is growing, not just in our own focus, but in our collective focus. So yeah, season 1, season 2, I highly recommend it. The Big One. I don't remember what we said, but I remember having just a great fucking time recording it.
Yeah, it's cool, the process and the progress of the podcast is almost like breathing and growing as it breathes. Like, season 1 and into season 2 is very much like, I don't know if you would consider it a breath in or a breath out, but then as we get into season 3 and 4, like, a lot of the conversation, especially season 1, we have a few more guests, season 2, but season 1 is very much just us having a conversation back and forth. Season 2 is very much a lot of that as well. Season 3 and season 4, we start incorporating a lot more guests, and there's some incredible guests. And so we dig deep into all of these topics as like very deeply through till we get to season 2, and then we start having conversations with people and start incorporating the conversation a little bit more. And so there's a very important component of going through the seasons, and it totally is understandable that people want to just get to the end and get to it, but then they're getting to the end and they have a lot of conceptual ideas of what the conversation is, despite us digging into it throughout and then having conversations with people. And there's probably, I bet there's certain guests you're going to resonate with a ton with the conversations that they have. Like Ray and I have our point of views, our backgrounds, our upbringings, and all of that stuff. And all, as much as we align with the recognitions that we discuss, everyone's different. Everyone sees people differently, resonates with people differently. And so I'm sure there's going to be a number of guests that you listen to through season 3 and season 4, especially, that you may resonate more with than others. And they may have a perspective that bridges the conversation for you a little bit more because they come from a similar background from you or have had similar experience. And so it's so important to go through in chronological order the podcast, and then you can, and if you want to quote unquote stay up to date or have questions, like Patreon, we got that free trial on the screen right there. Like hop in there and have the conversations with us. So it's anyway, it's very important to go through, but it's a lot of fun going through as well, because especially if you resonate even just a little bit with the initial couple episodes, like it's just going to keep going. And it's very much my process of digging deeper into these things, as well as Ray's, of course. But first 2 seasons are very much me asking a lot of questions, being very curious, kind of transitioning from that to being more able to articulate a lot of the things I was curious about early on. So it's a fun journey to go through. And as always, appreciate everyone who's willing to go through it, because you're a fucking warrior. If you get through, season 1 and 2, like it's impressive, honestly. Very impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. Do join us on Patreon if you can. And the reason I say that is because we talk about this stuff all the time. We don't mind going back to basics. We're always going back to basics because that's where the fucking core of it is. That's exactly the point. The more complicated it is, the more you're getting, more distracted. So we try to keep it simple. Easiest ways to chat with us, frankly. I mean, it's just like if you were able to read a good book about letting go, being yourself, so on and so forth, and then actually get on a call with the author and go, so I had a question, and then it could just fire you a quick insight that gives you something to chew on. I mean, this is why the conversations are so worthwhile. So if you can, patreon.com/dualistic unity. We do 5 days a week, a week of groups. Wow. Face isn't working right at the end of the episode. And we'd love to chat with you for sure. That said, if you don't want to go through season 3 and season 4, I'll understand. There's a lot of great guests there. I definitely recommend it. But if you're looking for a specific topic, go and search Dualistic Unity community topics. We have a playlist on YouTube, or you can just find it on Google. We've covered like 40 different topics, and specifically topics that were asked by the community about certain things. So chances are, if you're wondering about something, whether it's artificial intelligence or astrology or tarot or secret societies or anything, likely we've already done a community topics on it, our community topics episode on it, and it's definitely worth your time to go and check it out, because we'd love to know what you thought of it. We definitely try to be as thorough as possible. We have another vote coming up for community topics, actually. You can suggest a topic on our community Discord, which is totally free. Just go to dualisticunity.com and click on community to get to it. And then the vote is on our Patreon page, which is another thing that you can do if you become a Patreon supporter. That is about it for this Sunday's episode of Dualistic Unity Raw. This has been a lot of fun, man.
Oh yeah, a blast. We went all over the place today, but that was a lot of fun. And yeah, that reminded me, we'll be getting that vote out for community topics very soon. We used to do them every week, but we covered so many things that because a lot of our episodes too, they have 2 topics in them. So there's like about 40 episodes, but there's probably like 60, 70 topics. So we moved it to once a month, but we have a vote coming up. That vote is only on Patreon. You can suggest things in the Discord, but then we accumulate all of them and then the vote happens on Patreon. That'll be happening probably within the next 24 hours starting out. There will be a couple days to do it, and then yeah, we'll be doing that this week. So definitely hop in there, suggest a topic if you have one, and get that vote in. And yeah, looking forward to chatting about whatever you come up with.
Bye, everyone.